the camp.
Yeah. Good. They were. Yeah, we give credit to the Soviets. They bore the brunt of the battle against the Nazis in the largest numbers and largest. We have to give them credit for that. So okay, so now we're going to go ahead. I'm going to go to my theme. I said I'm going to take it to a shrink. Now I'm going to start off with something which is a little bizarre, but our topic is Sigmund Freud. So as you see it, you keep that in mind. It won't seem so bizarre. The famous play called Equus, featuring Radcliffe, the guy who played Harry Potter. Okay, I won't explain it now. I'll explain it afterwards.
Most shocking case I ever tried.
Why?
Because most people are going to be disgusted by the whole thing, including doctors.
Why? What's he done?
He blinded 6 horses with a metal spike.
Do you dream often?
Yes. Do you?
Yes. Do you have a special dream?
No. Do you?
Yes. What was your dream about last night?
I can't remember. What's yours about?
I said the truth.
That is the truth. What's yours about? The special one.
Carving up children. My turn.
What?
What's your first memory of a horse?
Well, what do you mean?
Well, the first time one entered your life in any way.
Okay, now we'll get to my topic and we ask, what does the horse have to do with Sigmund Freud? And what does Sigmund Freud have to do in the synagogue in the first place, right? And I'm going to ask that question, legitimate question. So, I'm continuing in my theme about the Jewish Trinity that took down the world with their concepts. Last week I talked about Marx, and for good or for bad, certainly shook up the world. We're at a point where about 1/2 of the world was under his ideas, operating under his ideas. Now we come to Freud. And you'll see that I'm much more favorable to Freud than I was to Marx in many, many ways. But a great iconoclast with certainly far less blood as a consequence, still a great disruptor of human society. And as I said, he never turned his back on us and never denied us. And I'm going to explain in what way was he Jewish. So you saw the clip from a play called Equus. It was based also, there was a film also by Sidney Lumet, and it gives an example of Freud and his impact on the arts. So the horse in the story is the object of desire, and it's also the overwhelming guilt that comes with it. The horse must be blinded in an act of conscience as a defense against the conscience. So it is reminiscent of a case that Freud actually had, which was Little Hans, which was actually one of his first important cases, a youngster who was obsessed because he'd seen a horse, and the horse has a male organ that is sort of big. And it led to an obsession and led to all of his psychological problems. And then out of this, Freud, as he interviewed him, listened to him, came to his idea of the Oedipus complex, the Oedipal complex. All right, so you never know what you can learn from a horse. Okay, there is a little picture there, you can see, of Dr. Freud in his famous pose with his cigar. And one of my professors of Talmud recalled being a student in his good days and attending a lecture with Freud, and Freud is smoking a cigarette. And everybody knows about Freud and symbolism, and they look at the cigar, and anything with a long object is a male symbol, and everybody's laughing. And Freud answers and says, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. I've heard it from other sources also. So it must be some of the Freud lore and legend. So what's important, he was born as a Jew, never went to the baptism, remained identified as a Jew, even if he was not religious and anti-religious. Family from Galicia, he himself born in Moravia, that's now Czechoslovakia, mid-1800s. A little bit about his career briefly. He started out in medicine. He went to France to work in a clinic under Charcot, who was a very famous neurologist, studying the science of the brain functions. And then he went on to study hypnosis as a means of helping people. Now, in the beginning of his career, he engaged in what we will call some very weird observations and approaches. There was a fascination with, what shall we say, the delicately self-pleasuring. That was one fascination. With one of his colleagues, he then went down what's called the rabbit hole theory, that the nose is the seat of all problems, and engaged in surgery of the nasal passages to help relieve people of their hysteria or the neurosis. And then if you're dealing with the nose, you put Coke powder up the nose as a way to heal the nasal passage. And so he went into his theory that things go better with Coke. That was his, right? And so he prescribed it to a friend of his to get the friend off of morphine addiction that he got into, I guess, because he had been getting it, who knows why. And then he discovered the morphine addiction indeed went away. The friend now had a cocaine addiction. And he said at that point, Coke decided that the idea of Coke is no longer good. Things do not go better with Coke. And he dropped his own predilection for Coke, the powder, not the fizzy. A lot of false starts, but that's the way to greatness. You see, most great people have bad starts. They come with all sorts of dead-end ideas till they come to an idea that works. But that's the scientific process also. So, sort of in a nutshell, some of his ideas. We're a bundle of never-ending desire, libido, and that is embodied in our actions under the term id, from the Latin word for self, or for the thing. It's the thing, it's it. And as we go on in life, we create what we may call the executive part of ourselves, which has to manage its way around the world, reality, and that's the ego, Latin word for I, ich. And that has to satisfy the id, because the id is a cruel driver of desire and demand, and yet he has to make do with the real world, where he collapses with reality. And so out of that comes the idea of the super ego, that which is above myself, which is my conscience, my judgment, my sense of a right and wrong that is always judging me. So the ego is always, the id is pushing me here, and the conscience is pushing here. Terrible, and I'm squeezed in the middle. So it's this constant warfare inside the human psyche that drives our personal life. And you know the story of the Oedipal complex. The toddler desires the mother, needs to destroy the father. And so the most powerful of drives in this battle is the sexual drive. There are other drives, but for Freud, this is the preeminent one. And here's our famous Oedipus. You remember him known for being a good man. Oedipus is a good man. He saves Oedipus, Thebes. Oedipus the Thebes, as the famous Sphinx. He saves the city from the Sphinx. As a reward, the king drops dead. He marries the queen. Boom, and that's the sin. And then Thebes is destroyed because of the sin that he's committed without his knowing. That's the Oedipal complex. All right. Freud loved mythology because he said that in mythology we find stories that talk about human reality. So this is the period where people are just coming out of the Victorian era. It's beginning to fall apart, but still, the Victorian era, remember, chairs had skirts around them so as not to show the legs on the chair. You ever notice that? Right? Because legs are not nice. All right, so an emphasis on human sexuality. Right? This emphasis was shocking, right? It's the cause of our eternal dissatisfaction. Freud had one of his books, Civilization, it's discontent, right? In order to be civilized, we have to restrain ourselves, but it's not happy. And Freud himself was sort of a prude in some sense because he wouldn't allow his wife to read the novel Tom Jones. Remember Tom Jones? It's a great English novel about a young rake who goes around, he gets all the women he wants. He didn't want his wife to read. It's like, it's fast nicht. All right. So whereas Marx had placed economics as the great immovable mover, Freud placed the sex drive as the great immovable mover. And you're also familiar then also with his concept of psychoanalysis. You go into a long drawn out process of reaching into the depths of your repressed memories and dreams, and you find that one trauma from toddlerhood or infancy that was undermining one's ability to achieve the goal, which for Freud was Leben und Arbeiten, to love and to work. Be able to love and be loved, to create, to be able to work. And these traumas got in our way. So we know Freud's language become part of common discourse. The couch, here's his actual couch in his office. You can see from the picture. I can make it a little bit larger for us. All right, and you can see that behind the office was his chair. And they asked the question, why did Freud sit facing away from his patients? You ever notice, he did not face the patient directly. It's because he felt uncomfortable looking into their faces. They were talking about these things that were bothering them in their lives. So that's the reason for the couch and the therapist sitting behind the couch. Well, a little more, let's go on down. Okay, well, we got this, all sorts of concepts that he's introduced that become part of common language. So it's part of my language, the penis envy, that's the problem of women, he said. And the women said, his great follower, Karen Horney, feminist follower, no, men have womb envy. 50-50. The Oedipus complex, his counterpart Jung said there's an electric complex for women. Kill the mother, get the father, right? The feminine version. We have anal retentive, latency, repression, sublimation, transference. These all come part of common conversation, actually, and literature till today. So what's the implication of all this? So very disastrous implication, because what he did was say this whole idea that we as human beings have full rational control over our feelings and thoughts, it's just not there. So Marx said we don't have control of ourselves because we're completely controlled by our means of production in economics. Freud says, no, it's our little denar stiftin. You know this in Yiddish? Denar stiftin, the little foolish kid inside him gets in his way, right? It's this irrational drive gets in his way. So this is my father, who was looking in 1930s at the intellectual trends of his day. And he wrote this about, and his complaint about Freud. Of course, he was in a youth group where the mentor to the youth group was Alfred Adler, who was Freud's main competitor. So maybe he had an axe on Freud from Alfred Adler. This is what he wrote. This is the fatalism of the subconscious, be it of the individual, according to Freud, or the collective, according to Jung. According to Freud, function of conscious thought in human endeavor is limited. Past events are forcefully drowned into the subconscious, which functions despite a controlling censor and forms our lives. Whereas individual subconscious supplemented by Jung through a collective subconscious stems from prehistoric strata and the evolution of our souls. That means that basically even stuff that went on in the caveman days is still controlling us. This determines our mental bearing. In contrast to the un and the subconscious, our conscious knowledge is of little bearing. Our education, our upbringing, that really doesn't control it. It's the subconscious that has the power to shape the destiny of people, give direction to the tendencies of one's life formation. So then he follows up and says, the trap of fatalism so tightly wound it leaves no room for action on the part of human will and consciousness. Right? We are just victims, nothing else. But there was something messianic in the vision of Freud. What do I mean by that? We are all bound and enslaved. He was going to liberate us from slavery, right? His goal was to find a way out of the compulsion of sexual guilt. And that would come only from confronting the demons directly through psychoanalysis. He would redeem humanity from the emotional forces bearing down on it. And he was aided by his apostles, the shlichim, right? His apostles, the first coded great figures like Jung and Adler. So, may I ask if Freud succeeded? In one sense, no. His theories are more prevalent in literature or in the arts, and much less so in psychology today, mostly for practical purposes. The long drawn out process of psychoanalysis required hours and hours of lying on the couch, on this couch, free association, letting whatever comes up come up without the analyst intervening. Just even silence is part of the therapy. Nothing comes out, that's also part of the therapy. And at a big price, because analysis said if you don't feel the pain of the price, you're not going to take it seriously. So it's expensive. And this becomes financially unviable in an era today where Insurance requires will cover you best 10 hours of a therapist with a master's degree, or drowning one's problem in prescription drugs. That's the other approach, right? Those are the two simplest approaches. Some behavioral modification is about it. So training of a professional analyst, psychoanalyst, also a very difficult one, very rigorous. It was originally only open to MDs. So first you have to be an MD and then go through lengthy training in including your own psychoanalysis. And this greatly limited access to practitioners. So the whole approach is very cumbersome and bulky. And on top of that, from a point of view of many different departments in psychology, like in my department when I was undergraduate, New York University, the head of the department would poke fun at clinical psychologists. We call it voodoo medicine. Right? So there's internal fighting within the field. So there's also behavioral conditioning as a treatment, very specific to actions, drug therapy today for a gamut of behavioral symptoms. On the other hand, it's crowded out much of Freud's practice. And even from a point of view of science of the mind, Freud himself said there has to be a physical basis for these functions. He was a physician, after all, and he was growing up in an era in which the physical, not the metaphysical, the practical reality, you had things that you could observe are what ruled. But there's no there when you do a scan of the brain to indicate, or any kind of surgery of the brain to indicate any of these functions as an entity in the brain. Brain function still today, great mystery. So in one sense, though, he does stand correct. Look through. We've gone through an era of free love. After Freud, in the peak of Freud, an era of free love. Everything is good. That's back in the beginning of the 1900s. Then the 60s and 70s make love, not war. It's just, my heyday. And until today, it's not resolved. Homosexuality, especially when you deal with gender identity, it's now front and center in the culture wars. So we have removed the barriers of sexual expression. We're free to talk and act out, supposedly. So we've created even newer emotional demons. Some things cannot be healed, like pedophilia, cannot be healed. We know these things, resistance to any treatment. We have problems of the incel, males who cannot have any, they just don't have any luck with women, right? And as I say, the sex drive is still an insurmountable problem in our lives. So he had a good point. He also served as a spur, back, this is very important. And this is very important. He served as a spur to the development of therapy of all kinds. But by the fact that by making this a topic, and making this an open topic, and talking about how one can relieve oneself of one's demons, there was a whole creativity, world of creativity that came out as a result. So we have his colleague Jung, who broke with him, emphasized the idea of collective consciousness, for example, or the idea that we carry in ourselves our male or female opposites, animus and anima, in order to be able to relate with each other. And that's from Jung. The idea of introvert, extrovert, from Jung. A lot of you see this Myers-Briggs inventory. You sign up for a job, they give you this inventory. Are you introvert, extrovert, and so on? It doesn't have much scientific basis behind it, but it's taken off from Jung. Other colleague, I mentioned Alfred Adler, rejected the primacy of the sex drive, but gave us the concept of inferiority complex. Our sense of failing as a competent being is what leads us into our traps. Or drive for aggression. I called it individual psychology, so looking at the total person in his environment. Just as an interesting thing, by the way, you remember Vladimir Melamed, Dr. Melamed, right? So he's now the archivist for the Center for Psychoanalysis here in LA. So, so he's got hands on some of these original documents going way back when. Okay, so now what I want to do is, okay, so here's a great guy, important. What about Jewishness, right? Just because you shook up the world, what about as a Jew? What am I doing? Talking to myself. How did this happen? My phone is talking to itself. Where is this? So my subconscious is talking on its own. I'm thinking of one thing and my phone is taking over. Okay, so what drove Freud? Interesting. It's thought this, a tale, and it's reported that when Freud was about 12, his father was telling him about the time he was growing up in Tischmanitz. That's the town in Moravia. It's under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Austro-Hungarian Empire, relatively positive towards Jews, forgiving of Jews, relatively speaking. A Gentile crossed his path on the pavement, knocked his hat off into the gutter, and jeering after him, Jew, get off the pavement. So what did you do? The little Sigmund asked his father, and Jacob was like, I stepped into the gutter and picked up my cap. From this bitter little memory, the adult Freud was to date his disillusion with his father, this insult. He accepted the insult as a Jew. And he had a great fantasy, he was obsessed with Hannibal. Why was he obsessed with Hannibal? Hannibal, Carthaginian. What is Carthage? Carthage is the Latin version of Canaanite, Kata Hadata, which anybody knows Aramaic and so on also knows is equivalent, which means the new city. Kiryah Hadashah in Hebrew, it's equivalent. Why are they speaking that? Because they are Phoenicians. What are Phoenicians? The wars are called the Punic Wars, by the way. Punic from Phoenicia. They're here in North Africa. They're from, what's Phoenicia? Northern part of Israel. There are Phoenician neighbors who speak almost the same language that we spoke. And so Freud had in his mind this, we once held off the Romans with this great Hannibal, in his mind. So that sense of making up for injustice as a Jew was under his mind. So what are the things? He always affirmed his Jewish identity, couldn't quite pinpoint what, but he was really conscious of his inner identity and some things with psychological structures also coming from his Jewish sources. So he was a godless infidel Jew and against religion and against Judaism. Nevertheless, is obviously, it talks about his impact of his early education, his Jewish family environment. His father, Jacob, was a Talmud scholar of sorts, and also from sort of a Hasidic milieu. So the guy who's writing this book review says, to understand Freud, you had to understand the rabbis, right? Psychoanalytic principles, meaning beyond and beneath the words, and behaviors rooted in Judaism. So then also his milieu, right? I mentioned Marx. Marx is Germany. German thinking is more clear-cut, Northern Europe, very rational. He's not, he is from where? He's from Vienna, Jeff, right? So what's the Vienna like? Gemütlichkeit, one thing. The other thing is the Jews of Vienna, where do they come from? From the eastern parts of the Austrian Empire. Galicia, Hungary, those areas. Well, those areas are under the atmosphere of Hasidism. The family originated in Buchach, that's the city of Agnon. So this atmosphere, even in Hasidim, the atmosphere affects them. What is Hasidic atmosphere? The stories of Rabbi Nachman and other Hasidic masters, whom the subconscious is very important in Hasidic tales, right? Realms of the imagination, realms of the mysterious, much greater part in their world. So Jewish influence, right? Mentioned, he described his father's background Hasidic, his mother traditionally Jewish. So they were no longer observant, but it was in his house. Freud was interested in Kabbalah. He was familiar with it. Perhaps some ideas of Kabbalah were embodied in his theory of psychoanalysis. Interpretation of dreams, said to be similar to the way the Talmudic scholars talk about dreams. Dream psychology that was so shocking during Jewish texts, symbolism, wordplay, enactment of taboos, and numerology. By the way, if you go into the Talmud, there's some heavy sex stuff in the Talmud. You don't want to read it. Okay, so if his father had familiarity with it, okay. And so also the interesting thing that psychoanalysis was dominated by Jewish men. He would joke, maybe it was about, I don't know if it was about Jung or one other one. He says, we have to allow a non-Jew into our group, right? Joke about it, right? Very Jewish society. Other things, he was openly identified with the Jewish community. Yeah, he was the great iconoclast. He had a book, Moses and Monotheism. Moses was an Egyptian. The Jews killed him, the whole thing. But he was very much a Jew still. He was aware of anti-Semitism around him. He himself had to flee Vienna as the Nazis took over. He was a proud member of B'nai B'rith in Vienna. B'nai B'rith in Europe, unlike in the United States, where it's an open membership, B'nai B'rith was a closed membership society. You had to be joined by invitation only. Invitation only. And it was dedicated to ethical society on the basis of Judaism. So I found there, somewhere, I found their emblem for the B'nai B'rith. Israelitische Humanitätsverein Austria. All right, the Jewish Humanitarian Society in Austria, B'nai B'rith, Ostschlesien, 1899, that's its founding date. Yehi Or, may there be light. B'nai B'rith, in Hebrew, Wohltätigkeit, which means charity, Brüderliche Liebe, brotherly love, and Eintracht, conscientiousness. No, unity, sorry. Okay, then in 1926, the Lodge honored him on his 70th birthday. Freud was suffering from cancer of the jaw in his later years. So he wrote this to them. What bound me to Judaism was, I must confess, not belief, not national pride, other considerations made the attractiveness of Judaism and Jews irresistible. Because I was a Jew, I found myself free from many prejudices which limited others in the use of their intellect. Being a Jew, I was prepared to enter opposition and to renounce agreement with the compact majority, right? Being a Jew is to be ready to tilt against windmills, to be willing to run with your head into a wall, hoping that you crack the wall and not your head. So some ideas of Jewish concepts that may have impacted Freud. I'll go into some Jewish sources. So one thing that came to my mind, and it's probably been bandied up by a lot of people, is that he has this tripart division of the mind, which is the id, ego, superego. Very similar to the idea of Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov. Yetzer Hara, primarily the human drive, the evil inclination. And then on the other side is the Yetzer Tov, that which drives us to do that which is right, and me in the middle, right? Equally powerful drive to do which is good. And the self is caught in between, and the rabbis have this phrase, Oili mi yitzri, Oili mi yotzri. I'm in trouble from my passions and drives, I'm in trouble from my creator. That's the human existence. We're very aware of it. And then I like to say, I paraphrase it, the id, what's id? Id in Yiddish is a simple Jew. That's an id. Then there's the yid. The yid is a Jew. Then yud is the Holy One. So you've got an id, a yid, and a yud. That's my rewording. So also when it came to sexuality, in many ways, Jews were freer in thinking about human sexuality than were Christians. Protestants more so than Catholics, but still there's some sense of hesitation because Jesus was celibate. And that impacted on the early Christian thoughts about sexuality. But the rabbinic perspective was different. Talmudic tell of a student who creeps into the teacher's bedroom to learn how the teacher engages in sex. The teacher looks at him and he hears him, he says, you sound like somebody who's never eaten before. And the teacher hears it and says, get out of here, it's not derech eretz, it's not proper. The student answers, Torah hi l'mod ani tzarich. This is Torah and I need to learn. I don't think you would hear that from the local priest, right? Very Jewish thinking. It is also, by the way, this is also repeated in Hasidic law. The Hasidim would sneak in and peek into the Rebbe, see what he's doing. So, also this idea of the Yetzer Hara, is evil really? The rabbis say, wait, Yetzer Hara, when they go to describe the creation of the world on Tuesday, when man is created, the word Yetzer is written with two yuds. Man is created by Yetzer, meaning shaping the human being with two yuds. There's a Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara, that's where we get the term. The indication being both are created by God. And both in principle are potentially good. It's how you balance them. That's what's important. So again, that a particular Jewish outlook. Sublimation, right? Where you take the desire, for example, to kill somebody, and you transfer it into the idea of becoming a surgeon, where now you're shedding blood to save someone's life, right? You're taking that impulse to kill blood, and you're now turning it into something productive and powerful and good. Sublimation. Well, you find similar things in Jewish sources. Again, Jewish thinking, positive action rather than denial. And so Talmud talks about teaching Rabbi Ishmael, that is discussing one attacks you, drag him with you into the house of study. Rather than denying him, you just engage yourself in study. If it is stone, it will be crushed. If it is iron, it'll split open. Right? This engagement in something, substituting positive for the negative, destroys the negative or crushes it. Then we also accommodate the desire. You know, in Deuteronomy, you may find this a rather weird parallel, but in Deuteronomy, there's a story about a captive woman in warfare. You come to an enemy city, you find a beautiful woman, you take her captive, and rather than rape her, which would be the normal thing to do, you have her sit for a month. And then after a month, you must treat her as a wife. And so the idea, as the rabbi explained, is by delaying rather than forbidding, one ends up eliminating. Either the person really loves her, or he lets her go free with no damage. Had I prohibited it, he would have raped her. And had I permitted it, he would have raped her. This way, it's like the Jewish mother syndrome. You say, oh, okay, go ahead, I'll sit there. You put the idea, you don't block it completely, you let it work itself out. And so in regards to this, one of the rabbinic commentaries is regarding the Yetzer Hara, the sex drive. Better that the children of Israel eat of improper meat. The animal's dying anyway, at least slaughter it kosher instead of letting it die and then eat it. Which is, I say, it's a weird metaphor, but that's the idea. Try to get them in doing the right thing rather than trying to forbid altogether because you're going to end up losing. Similar to that, the idea that there is no such thing as prohibited pleasure. No such thing as prohibited pleasure. There is prohibited action and certain prohibitions can be substituted with other actions. So we find this source, Midrash Tanhuma, talking about animals that one may eat, and goes on and says, whatever I've forbidden you from having, I've permitted you to have something else that has the same effect. I forbid you flesh of swine, you may eat a certain fish called shibuta, which resembles swine. I've forbidden you another man's wife. You have the opportunity of the captive woman, the beautiful woman in the war, right? So notice, everything, the idea being, it is not the action of pleasure that in itself is prohibited. It is the discipline that's involved around it. But that's the secret. So, and one last thing, the relationship of the pious Jew to his Rebbe was considered very similar to the relationship of the patient to the therapist. The Rebbe's assistant would take in the information, right? Intake, like a patient intake, you describe what's the situation, and then the Rebbe reads it in advance notes and person comes in. And so it's unlike the priest who would provide absolution from sin by confession, although that may have been an important part, the Rebbe served as counselor and advisor. I'm sure also it happened in clergy positions in Christian and in Islam as well. But so for my last step, I just put this sign up. The doctor is in, you remember that line from Peanuts? And here is an example of a Jewish psychologist, 3 centuries before Freud. This is the Baal Shem of London. He was a Kabbalist, actually the same time as the founder of Hasidism, but he was in London. He was a Kabbalist. He would give advice to people. He was very popular in London, also among non-Jewish circles. One of the things he was involved with was recording dreams, interpretation of dreams. So there we go. The doctor is in, there's your Jewish predecessor to Freud as an example. So that gives us an insight to Freud as a Jew, to Freudianism. As I say, the impact's still very great till today, whether or not there's actually in practice as much, still some of the underlying ideas are there with us today. So that's my topic. Next week, we'll look at Einstein as a Jew. Right? I'm not going to try to teach physics, but we'll look at Einstein as a Jew and take it from there. So to everybody online, Shabbat Shalom, and to all of us, Shabbat Shalom.